Okay, well, good morning. Thank you very much for coming. I'm delighted to be here, and I know we're all a little tired. So the shift in focus is pretty profound from the last conversations. If you've been with us, you know we've been talking about risk-based monitoring and the importance of new monitoring methodology in trials. And I'm grateful that people spend so much time and intellectual capital on that. And I'm grateful I don't anymore. But it's critical to the integrity of the data that we collect in our trials, so it's appreciated. I'm going to take a hard left turn in this conversation and talk to you more about what it's like to implement trials using different modalities of patient participation, leveraging technology for them to access those trials. So we're really going to look at some metrics around what happened in a single trial where there were virtual sites, there were brick and mortar sites, and then there were hybrid sites. Let's see if I can move there. Okay, so first a little bit about Curebase. Curebase is a full stack DCT technology company that also has site support services to enable virtual sites or the addition of virtual services to support traditional brick and mortar sites. Ooh, and I ran out of air. And this is just a little bit of the origin story here on the slide. So Tom, who's in the picture on the left, is our founder and CEO. He was recently named to 30 Under 30 by Forbes magazine. And as he was growing up, his sister, with whom he's really close, developed an autoimmune disease. And he got to live with her, understanding all of the challenges of treating that disease and not really being willing to break the relationship and bond that she had with her treating physician to access clinical trials. So it was a very frustrating situation for he and his family. Well, Tom grew up a little bit and off he went and studied computer science at Harvard. And he did bio and data science just after getting out of Harvard. And then he went to a company called SciAps. And SciAps' mission was to identify oncology patients based on their data from EMR and biomarker data sets so that they could be identified for participation in trials. And while Tom was able to solve the coding and make sense of the data to identify the patients, they didn't turn into clinical trial participants, which was another layer of frustration for him. It's like, now I've solved it with math, but something's not working. And that led him to found Curebase. He also went into the Y Combinator program, which is affiliated with Stanford. So he was working on the Curebase software while he was interacting with other innovators and leaders in that Stanford Innovation Exchange. So he became the CEO, and Curebase was founded as an organization around 2017. We've now been in business for about 5 years, and we've run upwards of 60 trials. Most of them have been diagnostics and biomarker trials and a lot of digital therapeutics trials. And the company is growing pretty quickly. The pandemic helped, but I think so did the changes in society's understandings of access and the need to access. So we'll have time for questions if you want any more data, and people who are more expert on all of those facts are here in the room with me. So I'm just showing you this because my world has always been drug development, and I think of clinicaltrial.gov around those trials, but we did pull out the data on device trials. It's a pretty big sector of the market, and it's going to continue to grow. In fact, I think, based on my limited experience so far, digital therapeutics are going to be a big growth area in the trial domain in the next few years. It's all new to me, so it's pretty fun and exciting. Oh, yes. Okay, so the study. Full disclosure, I didn't work on this study. I got there after this study was well in progress and actually about to end. So really the credit for the work goes to our colleagues, Arsheen and her team of virtual coordinators. Also, I want to give credit to our data scientist who pulled all of this data for me so we could actually do the analysis on operational outcomes. So back in 2020, we partnered with a digital therapeutics company. They were trying to test whether or not a digital intervention could be therapeutically useful in a setting for gastroenterology. It was a non-invasive treatment, but it was a multi-cycle treatment. So instead of getting your chemo dose every 6 weeks, you would be interacting with this digital therapeutic on a regular basis. It was a 2-long study, and there were a lot of patient-reported outcomes that would be collected as the primary measures of efficacy. It meant that in order to prove whether or not this was working, we were going to need to keep the patients along the journey for the whole ride. So we deployed full-service decentralized trial execution with virtual sites and software configuration and development. Oh, right, and we were in complete lockdown. So the sponsor had the study started, but the lockdown happened pretty early on, and there had to be a big pivot. So here at the bottom, I think this is actually pretty interesting. We started 13 virtual capable sites and activated them in an 8-week time frame, which to me is truly heroic effort because in the pandemic, it was hard enough to know how to do anything, but to find de novo research sites and get them trained and ready to go must have been an incredible work effort on Arsheen's part. I also think it's pretty cool that 700 patients were enrolled in 5 months. This is a US-only study, to be clear, but we did have patients who enrolled across 13 states. So that's the framework of the trial, and what else can I tell you quickly? So the therapeutic intervention was actually watching videos at specific intervals and learning how to manage symptoms while you were watching the videos, and then testing about the patient's perception on pain and inconvenience based on their disease. By the way, that intervention and all this data has now been approved by the FDA, and so the intervention is going to be available for patients shortly. So now I'm going to pivot. We've talked about what the study was like. Now I'm going to show you some data, and if you know me, and some of you do, I've been in clinical operations most of my life, and I've spent a good part of that work thinking about patient recruitment and patient engagement. And as I was looking at the data, I was thinking of the myths that we think about or hear around patient recruitment, engagement, retention, adherence, and experience. Okay, so I gotta share this with you just for a sec. So first, remember I told you they had to pivot the study because they had a brick and mortar setup. So the virtual sites were added to supplement the traditional brick and mortar sites. Those were managed by a virtual PI overseeing a team of virtual research coordinators. Those virtual research coordinators are full-time staff members at Curebase. They're all fully GCP trained. Of course, they're protocol trained. And they're multilingual. So it's pretty interesting because they can operate in multiple time zones and languages, but they are there to support the patient and the PI. We did have a brick and mortar site where clinicians conducted in-person appointments with patients to the degree they could within lockdown. And they were offered the opportunity to try on virtual sites or virtual tools, but that wasn't something they chose to do. Then we had some sites where there were some in-person visits and some visits done through telehealth with the virtual CRCs. And then we had the site on the right where everything happened virtually. And when I say everything, I mean from recruitment to consent to enrollment and randomization, and then all the data collection. So this is how that looked. First, there was a baseline visit in person or virtually after an online pre-screener was completed and a patient went through the e-consent. The e-consent process was not done solo. It could be done in an office, it could be done remotely, but there was always somebody going through the actual e-consent process with the participant. After they went through that, there was an onboarding call, really to test whether or not the patients understood what was expected, because there was a 4-week data collection period to verify that they were indeed the right fit for the trial based on their symptoms, based on their prior history and their diagnosis. So think of it like a run-in before the randomization. If they made it through that based on their symptoms and pain level, they were asked to use this treatment intervention to go through 7 iterations of a training video where they would learn how to manage their symptoms with this digital intervention. And then there was a long-term follow-up. So there was lots of reporting on daily IBS symptoms and also a few other data points, but they were collected remotely or through telehealth. Okay, I had a 5-minute mark. Yikes, that's kind of scary because I've got a lot more to show you. So here's the data. The dark bars are brick and mortar. The medium are mixed sites, or what I would call hybrid sites. And the light ones are virtual. So one of the myths is that older patients don't want to use technology. That's clearly not what happened here. Now, it was during lockdown, and it was with the assist of virtual research coordinators, but I challenge you to say, maybe age is not the limitation here. Myth 2, that different racial and ethnic groups distrust the healthcare system. That is a true statement, and therefore they won't participate in research trials. And on this little table, you'll see here are the FDA averages for trials across all domains. You can see our data is pretty different between the brick and mortar, the mixed, and the virtual site. And I'm really quite impressed, that the African American population was so well represented here. And there were some differences again between who wanted to use which modality. So to me, it's a validation of the concept of patient optionality. By the way, this is an N of 1 study, but in general, our data does reflect a much more diverse set of participants than traditional trials have. And this is from a sample of about 761 patients. So it's not a tiny sample size. Okay, so myth 3, it's hard to recruit qualified patients outside of a brick and mortar site. The subtext there is, well, the docs don't know those patients, they're never really going to engage. So we had 1 virtual site, 1 brick and mortar site, and 22 hybrid sites. You can see that there was a pretty big difference on how people were willing to consent. Again, it was in lockdown, so there were some barriers to the in-person consent. But I think that this is a good case study to prove you can pivot and save your study and maybe even go further than you expected. Myth 4. The patients you find out in the world from social media have a higher rate of screen failure. And sites have often told us, Kate knows this well, that those patients might be a waste of time because they're not likely to screen in. They're just doing it for reasons that are self-motivated. So we looked at the data between the virtual, the brick and mortar, and the mixed site setting. And there were a lot of patients that went in through the virtual and mixed. You see that brick and mortar, 4 patients dropped off from the top of the funnel to this next layer. But I think it's also interesting to see that they're pretty comparable numbers in terms of who progressed from consent to the baseline visit. So it's not statistically significant, but it's not worse. Okay, so then once they get in, will they do what we expect of them, especially because we've never interacted with these patients? Anybody ever heard that? I've heard that. And again, the data shows that there was congruency across those different models of study delivery. Again, it's not statistically significant, but it means that I feel confident that you're not going to have a data compliance issue if you use these modalities. And what about those patients? Would they actually stay in the trial and get through everything they need to do? Well, actually, it was kind of interesting because our virtual patients did the best of all 3 groups by a little bit. The brick and mortar sites, remember they had a much smaller number of patients, did retain them, but the virtual sites had way more patients and still managed to retain them. And then my favorite myth. Patients aren't going to remember anything about the study providers. They might remember who their coordinators were, I would imagine they would, but this tech thing is just a burden and they won't remember this at all. So we decided to ask. And bear in mind, I sent out this survey 2 weeks ago, so it's at least, like, the most recent completion was 3 months ago. And some of the patients have not interacted with the system for more than 6 months. So it was simple, 5 questions. How important was it to have digital features like telemedicine, digital patient surveys, appointment reminders for your participation in the trial? Pretty good numbers. Really, we think that this is indicative that whatever happened there was useful for these patients. Could I get the same numbers next time? I don't know, but I'm starting to encode these questions as a standard. I love this slide. What was the ease of use of the Curebase tools in the study? And frankly, that number shocked me. It was so incredibly positive. I'm like, maybe we need to ask in a different way. We'll continue to look into that. But also, how difficult was it for you to participate in the study? It wasn't perfect for everyone, but about 96% said it was either easy or very easy. So that's better than most studies I've ever seen. Again, it's not a drug therapeutic. It wasn't an intervention, but there was a very long-term commitment to being in the trial. And then we asked them, well, if you could use one word, how would you describe the Curebase toolkit? And these are pretty good words. I like them because a lot of what I hear is sites and patients are overwhelmed by technology. They're not sure what to do and how to use things. When I see words like helpful, simple, and easy coming out as the top answers, it gives me hope that maybe we're on the right path generally. And this is my favorite slide of all, because we know that it's very hard to get patients to participate in trials, and also that those who do are more likely to participate again. But we asked, how likely would you be to participate in another trial if you could use these tools? And 95% said they would. This was not about study design. This is just about whether or not these tools, technologies, and support systems were helpful. So we're really excited about that data. We're caveating it, saying this is an N of 1 study, but now we're going to be integrating these patient experience collection modalities into our trials with the help of some survey experts, so we don't overwhelm patients, but to make sure that we can adjust what we build for patients to keep feeling like this is easy and they would do it again. So, the conclusions. It's pretty clear to me that the virtual site model worked well in the medical device setting, and it managed to both recruit and engage patients. And it enabled brick and mortar sites to do more than they could in the past. Also, we found that there was an improvement in both recruitment and study completion in the virtual model compared to the other two. So it's pretty interesting that while we've been thinking that this adds a lot of risk, in this study, it actually added benefit. And I think most importantly to me, I really want to start working as a thought partner with those sponsors so that we design the trials in an optimal way to use these tools and support models without adding burden and while keeping all of the data elements congruent, compliant, accurate, and complete. So I think I went over time, but I want to say thanks for sticking with me. And if you want to ask questions or if you want more information offline, you can reach me at jane.curebase.com. Thank you so much.